In 1948, a doctoral advisor named Harrison Brown handed a young geochemist a seemingly straightforward assignment: measure the lead isotopes in zircon crystals to determine the exact age of the Earth. The geochemist, Clair Patterson, set to work, but immediately he ran into a wall. Every sample he tested was hopelessly contaminated with astronomical levels of lead. It was on his instruments, in the air, on his skin. Before Patterson could figure out how old the planet was, he had to figure out why the world was covered in a microscopic layer of toxic metal. That detour would lead him to uncover one of the greatest public health hazards of the 20th century and pit him against a billion-dollar industrial syndicate. To understand where this lead was coming from, we have to rewind to December 9, 1921. An engineer named Thomas Midgley Jr. discovered that adding a compound called tetraethyl lead to gasoline eliminated engine knocking. By February 1923, leaded gasoline went on public sale in the United States, backed by industrial giants who formed the Ethyl Corporation. But lead is a known neurotoxin. To manage public concern, the industry turned to Dr. Robert Kehoe, a toxicologist who directed the Kettering Laboratory of Applied Physiology. Dr. Kehoe established what became known as the Kehoe Rule. He claimed that human blood lead levels below 80 micrograms per deciliter were entirely harmless. More importantly, Kehoe established an industry-accepted baseline. He argued that the lead found in modern urban populations was completely natural. For decades, this medical consensus went unchallenged. Meanwhile, back at the California Institute of Technology, Clair Patterson was still trying to date the Earth. To isolate his samples from the bizarre ambient lead he kept finding, Patterson constructed the first ultra-clean laboratory environment in the world in 1953. Inside this pristine space, he could finally analyze samples from the Canyon Diablo meteorite without modern contamination ruining his isotope counts. In 1956, Patterson published his results. He calculated the age of the Earth to be 4.55 billion years old. The number was a monumental scientific achievement, one that stands to this day. But Patterson was deeply unsettled by what his cleanroom had revealed. He now knew precisely how much lead belonged in the natural environment, and it was a fraction of what was floating in the air outside his laboratory. The ambient lead was not natural at all. Patterson pivoted his entire career to trace the source of this contamination. In 1963, he published research linking widespread atmospheric lead to gasoline exhaust. But to prove that modern humans were being poisoned, he had to demonstrate what a truly natural human lead level looked like. Over 1964 and 1965, Patterson traveled to the extremes of the Earth. He extracted polar ice core samples from Greenland and Antarctica to track how atmospheric lead had accumulated over centuries. He went even further, examining the remains of pre-industrial Peruvian mummies. His findings were undeniable. Patterson proved that modern human lead exposure was 700 to 1,200 times above natural baselines. Dr. Kehoe had defined natural lead levels by measuring modern people who were already chronically exposed. Patterson had found the true baseline, exposing a fundamental flaw in the industry's decades-old defense. When Patterson published his comprehensive findings in September 1965, the retaliation was swift. The American Petroleum Institute, a trade association that had actually funded some of his early ocean research, abruptly revoked his funding. The petroleum industry leveraged its immense influence to pull financial support and even attempted to block Patterson from receiving further government research grants. The stakes were enormous. The Ethyl Corporation and its backers were defending a highly profitable global enterprise. They had relied on the medical assurances of their paid experts for 40 years. Now, an academic geochemist working out of a Caltech cleanroom was threatening the foundation of their entire business model. But Patterson refused to be silenced, taking his data directly to lawmakers. The climax of this battle arrived in June 1966. Senator Edmund Muskie, chairman of the United States Senate Subcommittee on Air and Water Pollution, convened landmark hearings on atmospheric pollutants. Historical records vary slightly on whether Patterson testified on the day the hearings commenced, June 8th,
or specifically on June 15th. What is undisputed is the impact of his presence. Patterson sat before the committee and directly challenged the industry representatives. He dismantled the Kehoe Rule, arguing that what the industry called normal exposure was in fact a state of chronic, low-level lead poisoning for the entire American population. The scientific definitions clashed openly: Kehoe's urban baseline against Patterson's pre-industrial reality. This testimony fractured the industry's monopoly on lead research and laid the groundwork for federal intervention, culminating in the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1970.
The phase-out of leaded gasoline did not happen overnight. In 1975, unleaded gasoline was finally introduced nationwide in the United States. Ironically, the primary driver for this shift wasn't directly public health, but rather engineering. Lead destroyed the newly mandated automotive catalytic converters. However, the overwhelming health data made a complete return to leaded fuel impossible. In 1986, the Environmental Protection Agency drastically reduced allowable lead limits, and by January 1, 1996, leaded gasoline was completely banned for all road vehicles in the United States. The results vindicated Patterson entirely. Following the removal of lead from gasoline, American blood lead levels plummeted by up to 80%.
Clair Patterson did not set out to become a public health crusader. He simply wanted to know the age of the Earth, and he refused to accept compromised data to find it. That obsessive commitment to accuracy broke a 40-year cycle of industrial denial. In the process of looking billions of years into the past, one geochemist successfully altered the atmospheric chemistry of the future, saving millions of minds from a silent, invisible poison.